Hello again, my name is Nathan Smith. I'm a PharmD candidate at the University of Arizona College of Pharmacy. I'm working in collaboration with Dr. Terry Warholick, an assistant professor at the University of Arizona College of Pharmacy. This is the third part of 3 presentations which I titled Data NOIR. They are intended as a review for anyone designing a research study. In Part 1, we defined and identified nominal, ordinal, and interval ratio data. In Part 2, we learned to identify the types of appropriate measures of central tendency and dispersion based on the type of data. In other words, we looked at descriptive statistics. In Part 3, we will be looking at selecting appropriate inferential statistic tests based on the type of data collected. That way you can determine if there is any significant difference within your groups. Pairing the type of data with the right type of statistical test is like pairing a type of wine with the right type of food. Except in statistics, it's absolutely necessary to make the right pairing in order to obtain meaningful results. The information that I'll cover in this section comes from this Guide to Inferential Statistical Tests of Difference by Dr. Zajarik and Dr. Malone at the University of Arizona, and a copy of this flowchart may be available to you upon request. In order to select an appropriate statistical test, you have to determine what type of data do you have. Is it nominal, ordinal, or interval ratio? The next thing you have to do is determine were the groups independent or dependent. Independent groups are made up of different subjects in each study group. Dependent groups are the same subjects in each study group. These are often paired, matched, or repeated measures. After you determine the answers to those 2 questions, then you can look at the different type of tests depending on the type of data you have. So what type of test can you run for nominal data? Well, if you have 2 or more independent groups, you can do a Preacher's chi-squared test, also known simply as a chi-squared test. Now, this one's very common and popular. You can also run a logistic regression or a Fisher's exact test. If you have 2 or more dependent groups, McNamar's test is the most appropriate test for you. If you have ordinal data, what type of test can you run? Well, if you have 2 independent groups, you can perform a Mann-Whitney U-test or a Wilcoxon rank sum test. If you have more than 2 independent groups, you'll be using a Kruskal-Wallis test. If you have 2 dependent groups, you can perform a Wilcoxon signed rank test. If you have more than 2 dependent groups, you can perform a Friedman test. And if you're just looking at association with one group, you can perform a Spearman-Rowe correlation. If you have 2 groups and you're looking at associations, you can do a logistic regression. What if you have interval ratio data? Well, if you have independent groups, if you have 1 independent group, you can do a 1-sample t-test, and these t-tests are also known as student's t-test. If you have 2 groups, 2 independent groups, you can perform a t-test regression. If you have 3 independent groups, you can perform an analysis of variance regression, also known as an ANOVA regression. And if you have dependent groups, there are different tests that you would perform. If you have 1 dependent group, you will perform a 1-sample t-test correlation. If you have 2 dependent groups, you can run a paired t-test. If you have 3 dependent groups, you can run a repeated measures ANOVA. So choosing an appropriate statistical analysis, as we've covered, depends on the type of data that you've collected. In the designing of your study, it's critical to choose an appropriate test based on the data you have. To report any meaningful results, it's necessary to perform the appropriate statistical analyses. Again, here is the Guide to Inferential Statistic Tests of Difference that will help you to choose what type of inferential statistic test you can perform based on the type of data you have and whether or not you have an independent or dependent group. Again, here are the references for my presentations. I thank you for your time, and good luck.